Welcome to the EdUp Smart Space podcast, where we explore the important topics and trends at the intersection of architecture, technology, and education. Hello, I'm Craig Park, your host. In today's episode, we'll discuss wellness, sustainability, and technology, how WELL and LEED certifications are shaping the future of academic facilities, with my special guest, Heather Keele, a principal and colleague at Clark Enersen Architects and Engineers based in Lincoln, Nebraska. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you, Craig, for having me.
It's great to have you here. Heather, you have a strong background in architecture and sustainable design. Can you share a bit about your journey to becoming a principal at Clark Enersen and what drives your work in academic facilities planning and design?
Definitely. I first became very interested in people-centric design during my graduate work at the university, where my thesis project was based on understanding how the built environment impacts people. I dug into Christopher Alexander's work. At the time, he had published a pattern language as well as other works where they were really trying to understand how behavior is impacted by space, how people have an emotional connection to place and why. They were really trying to bottle the magic and codify in a formulaic collection of works of how to create space that was meaningful and impactful. And starting early on with understanding what other architects and designers had done was really important to me. Then moving forward, many years, I've been practicing since 2001. My work in higher ed really developed because of understanding higher education, colleges, universities, conservatories. They are training the next generation, and they are a microcosm community that is super impactful. Whereas people learn and are shaped by their home environment and their parents to go from childhood to young adulthood. Higher ed shapes young adults into the artists, the engineers, the big thinkers of the next generation. And so having meaningful space that is a sandbox for creative thinking and developing thinkers of the next generation is huge. And so I love higher ed because in some small way, the spaces that we develop become a catalyst for innovation for generations to come.
Absolutely. You can see that. It's one of the proudest moments I always have is when we get to see the opening of a building we've worked on for the last 3 years and see the look in the eyes of the students that are getting to learn there. What types of projects are you currently leading that integrate technology, wellness, and sustainability goals?
Like every project that I'm working on is interweaving those things, and largely because I bring that to the table. If people haven't thought about that, I bring that to the table and the conversation because place as an architect is designed for people. It's our cities, our campuses, our neighborhoods, our parks, our streets, our buildings. Those are all people centric. So we have to bring that human component to that. Part of our human experience is the digital world. In many cases, our students spend just as much time interfacing with each other digitally as they do physically. And so understanding from a higher education standpoint how you can leverage the virtual reality and their existence with that physical reality and existence is key, because if you don't have both, they won't want to be there.
Well, it's interesting. We talked a lot in preparing for this show about well building and LEED certifications and their impact on design today, what clients are looking for. For those unfamiliar, can you give a brief explanation of well versus LEED and how they complement each other in academic facility planning?
Definitely. They do complement each other. And the easiest way to think of this is LEED is focused on building performance with conservation in mind, energy use, water quality, things like that, and how the building is dealing with the resources. Well is focused on people performance, and that is how people are mentally, emotionally, and physically impacted in a positive or negative way by the built environment. Both LEED and WELL have macro features where they're looking at city planning. Are they connected to multimodal transportation? Are they cleaning up a brownfield site? All the way down to, and probably one of the biggest drivers would be daylight. And that's one that's tricky when we talk about the digital world in our buildings and understanding, especially in a classroom environment, how do we provide connection to nature, daylight, and then still have an audiovisual experience that is superior.
How how are indoor environmental quality standards like lighting, acoustics, air, and thermal comfort shaped by the integrated building technologies we work with?
That's a great question, and one that I think takes a couple of things. It takes technology, but it also takes people to understand how to best implement the technology, manage it, and run it. As an example, using daylight harvesting in buildings, which is something that the new energy code requires us to do, and understanding and educating clients on how that space is going to automatically make those adjustments throughout the course of a day and how that changes over the seasons. And then also, I might mention one thing that's wonderful, especially in higher ed work, is they very likely have well trained facilities and building management technicians so that as we start to automate buildings, we can collect data and obviously, they're monitoring and making adjustments as needed based on the way they've programmed the system. However, we can also start to collect that data and post it. That's something that we're starting to do for a couple universities where we're creating sustainability websites. So not only can we post what we had planned to do in the metrics, we can then collect data and show them real time what is the temperature, what is the water quality in that space, so people can feel very comfortable that they're in the best, highest performing space.
I worked with the University of Iowa, and they have a program where they have implemented sensor based data, and they put it on dashboards in the lobby of every building. They're one of the more advanced universities, I think, doing this kind of work.
Dashboards, whether they're on visual display boards in the building, on websites. The other thing that's great is to be able to do additional kind of survey work to understand the mental and emotional impacts, which is what well brings to the table. So understanding not only are my physical needs met, are my psychological needs met in this building so that I can be my best self? That's where it really is important in higher ed to understand the prescriptive parameters of the built environment to create ideal cognitive performing spaces so that not only are you getting great test results and graduating wonderfully well developed students. University of Nebraska, for instance, is an R1 research institution. We're looking at what are the undergraduates, the graduate students, the doctoral students, and the faculty doing in their laboratories and in their classrooms to be innovative. And having a top performing building for human centric factors takes every barrier out of the way for them to be their best performing self.
What technology driven strategies help institutions meet well or lead certification goals? An example might be sensors or automation systems or data tracking, which you just mentioned. Are there others?
Yes, all of those are very relevant. One thing that you don't see commented on often is the very early stage planning. So, understanding how to effectively run an integrated charrette to develop sustainability and wellness goals is huge. We cannot count a project successful by any measure if we don't know what we were planning to achieve. So we usually start there, and we do that with a series of intake questions and tools and focus groups to identify what are the overarching goals, what are the owner's project requirements, developing an OPR, so that we then on the backside, when we look at those dashboards, we can understand, have we met those goals? Part of that is including a post occupancy survey. Do people feel the way and perform the way we had hoped in a built environment? So using the tools at the beginning, a lot of construction technology, I would say on the implementation side, is catching up to what we're trying to do with Lead In Well. An example that was post COVID would be a touch free restroom experience. There was a huge shift to move to hand dryers, for instance. The thing that's great about the well building standard is every feature and parameter is backed by scientific evidence. There's actually a lot of information contrary to using hand dryers, and because that actually moves pathogens and microbes around the restroom, whereas paper towels, especially if they're compostable and recyclable, actually do a better job not only of cleaning your hand, but also they are limiting exposure of spread of pathogens. Then take that a bit further, understanding how we develop and engineers can solve for touch-free environment throughout that experience from the time you walk in to the time you walk out. So some of it's very sophisticated, like sensors and actuators and operators, and some of it's very, very simple and doesn't cost any more, like swinging the door the right way and allowing people to use their wrist or their elbow.
How do AV, IT, and smart building systems contribute to both occupant wellness and sustainability performance in your projects?
At the University of Nebraska Lincoln, we utilized aware sensors in addition to some building standard sensors. That is able to take live time measurements and post those. An example here of that building is we had an issue where the building occupants weren't very comfortable. We looked at it on paper and everything looked like it should be very comfortable. And this was October to kind of January. They were seeing some temperature fluctuations. So we came in and using those sensors, the university building management system was able to provide us a series of metrics throughout the day, including is the space occupied or not? Are the shades up or down? So we understood not only what was the weather and overlaid that, we understood occupancy, frequency, and then we looked at a series of a month data. What our engineers were able to find where we thought, oh, the shades aren't the right percentage, or we need to add some solar glare film. What it came down to is the system functionally didn't have the right inputs. So the chilled beam systems weren't performing as they were prescribed to perform, essentially. This building was commissioned, but having data available to us at that very small level helped our engineers to identify the actual issue was the inputs in the programming of the mechanical system. So they're in the middle of making corrections for that today. It's wonderful because we'll be able to take another look at that live data and see, have we seen the measurable difference in the temperature fluctuation that the occupants were reporting.
How do you balance these prescriptive certification standards with the need for flexible, future ready spaces in higher education that are likely to evolve during the life of that building?
This is an interview question we receive on every project. They talk about future adaptability and timeless design. And I would say any architect worth their salt is going to tell you that there is no such thing as being completely prepared for the future and timeless. What we can do is work with what we have learned. What we have learned is designing spaces that have a broader structural flexibility is key. People may say, why do you go to a structure? When you look at buildings from the 50s and 60s, and we had these tight column grids and we had these low floor to floors, adding anything to that building is a challenge. We all know the most sustainable building that any university has is the one they already own. But it's very challenging to upgrade facilities that are designed too tight. So one of the best things we can do is actually design buildings that have space and room for growth within the boundary of the building itself. I'm talking about having larger clear spans, having taller floor to floor, things like a raised access floor system where it's very, very easy to change, having demountable and modular walls so that you can, maybe not within the day, but from year to year, you can adjust. Is it a large classroom? Is it a small classroom? There's some integration there, as well as just flexibility and adaptability of how you're doing your power distribution. Is it overhead? Is it below? Those all can create adaptability for the future as we don't know what to expect as things are developed every year.
How can integrated design teams, the architects, engineers, consultants, planners, the owner as well, work together to support certification and performance goals?
That's a great question. Probably the most unique component of the well building standard is that has an intersection of design features, of policy, and procedures. What that means is we have to train people how to use the building. We have to include things like mental health promotion, awareness. That's unique to well because policy plays largely into the human experience in our buildings. That's probably the unique piece when we talk about future adaptability and how certification of well and lead play into it is each building, and I mentioned timelessness before being sort of a false notion. What we're doing and in building design, it's an intersection of people, of place, of time, and of the program. What are they trying to do with time? That's where things are fixed and that evolves, and all of them evolve at different paces. And so that's the real challenge there. And so what is wonderful about both the lead and well is they have beta features that they test. They run advisories for new work coming out. I was able to participate for 2 years on the MIND advisory for the well building standard. We were able to develop new features to create neuro equity in higher ed environments to understand what does that look like for someone that's neurodiverse. Then also look at from a nutritional standpoint, people need sustenance. and we need quality sustenance. Sometimes the higher ed environment is ramen noodles and soda, and we all know you put something gross in, you feel kind of gross. And so understanding how do we create equitable access to healthy nutrition on campuses? That's a really long-winded response to how we do that. I think it's much more than just organizing building certifications and design parameters. It's in longevity, good policies, good procedures, good availability of what people need.
It reminded me of the moment when my daughter showed me all of the ramen recipes she had developed in her dorm and then in her sorority house. I thought I was paying more than she could eat better, but a very good point. Are there any lessons learned or misconceptions about well and lead that you often encounter in academic projects?
Yeah, in academic projects and all projects, the real barrier is people's misconception that it costs more to do it right. It can cost more, but it depends on how you're evaluating that. Are you evaluating at your original cost of construction, or are you evaluating this over your long-term costs of replacement of people, of poor performers that drop out of class, or of replacement of not well designed mechanical systems that were really low cost to begin with and they were poor performers from an energy standpoint? You have to replace them much more frequently than a building system that would provide higher quality air and clean air and also provide the kind of data that we talked about from a feedback loop standpoint in the dashboard. So the biggest misperception really is cost, and with some exceptions it really doesn't cost any more. When you look at your 20-30 year lifespan of that first part of a building, it really doesn't cost more to do it right. That's something to keep in mind, is look at the long-term costs versus your short-term costs when we look at lead and well. You don't have to get certified. I think it's really important to think about these are great strategies and features that are just guides. Certification is wonderful because then you can prove that it's actually doing what you've designed it to do. But if you even use them as guideposts along the way, the planning process and the building itself is going to be far, far improved.
I agree. There's many aspects of technology where looking at the total cost of ownership really demonstrates why this is a good first cost. Might be seem higher in the moment, but ultimately will save you cost in the overall building lifetime. In what ways do Well and Lead support equity, inclusion, and student success on campus? You've talked a little bit about this, but can you expand on that?
Yeah, the well building standard actually does have an equity rating. If anyone's interested in that, just go to well.com to look into that. Ultimately, we like to think about both of them supporting people based on their needs. We really try to think of it as design all spaces for all people. Another thing that we challenge our team during design is, who doesn't this work for? If you can answer that question, then you can say, how can we shift this and pivot this so that we can overcome that barrier? We're creative design professionals, architects and engineers. Sometimes we just need to stop and think and dig in on that. It really does encourage a lot of equity when it comes to understanding how we deal with, for instance, recruitment. We had a higher ed client that wanted to see more women come in the door and stay and graduate. What they realized is the aesthetics of the interior of the space was not telling them that they belonged. There's actually well features that talk about how do you craft and brand and reflect culture of place and culture of people and celebrate them. Using some of those strategies, we were able to understand what the design impacts for that particular building meant to be able to apply to women, to apply to men, to apply to people that were non-binary, and make everyone feel like they belonged. It was simple things, whereas maybe not all the photos on the wall should look like the same thing. Just adding
A gray haired old guy.
right. And you know, you hate to say that, but you walk in a lot of higher institutions and there's white gray haired men on the wall. That's really hard for, my daughter is multiracial. To have a multiracial young woman come in and go, I fit in here, it's like the walls aren't telling her that. It's as simple, it's those little things, but it's also the big things. That's where Well and Lead really do a great job. Also, accessibility. And I'm not talking about ADA, I'm talking about, where are you coming from? Say you don't have the privilege of owning a car. Can you get there? Is it adjacent to a bus route? Is it adjacent to a trails? And so that's where Well and Lead really do a great job of bringing together a perspective of what is keeping someone from accessing this building, this campus, and being their best self. Then they tell you and show you, how do you overcome that?
Really good information. Thank you. One of the things I was on a panel earlier this week talking about smart infrastructure and the intersection of technology and Internet of Things and sensors and beacons to truly build smart, self-aware buildings. Two-part question: one you're prepared for, and one you may not be. How does smart infrastructure contribute to real-time feedback loops that inform student experience and operational decisions? And how open are our university clients to thinking about smarter buildings?
Great question. I think they are open to it. I think, especially their IT departments, and if you have a sophisticated facilities maintenance group, that's great. Programmers, controllers love this stuff. What the barrier is making the change and system wide making a change. A lot of campuses have a standard, and that is every building. When you think we're going to upgrade one, then it can feel overwhelming because it means you're going to need to systematically change every building on campus over so that you're functioning and operating them similarly. That can be a barrier. There was one thing else I wanted to comment on related to this. One of the biggest things we hear related to integrating tech is people sometimes don't like to feel like they're watched. The challenge is, like, we've done the utilization studies where you can do sensors under chairs. That's a really interesting feature. So when we're studying it, say a space is designed for so many occupants, and we're measuring based on, the enrollment trends and what the bursar's office gives us, what is actually happening in that room. So measuring utilization in a couple different ways can sometimes make faculty feel nervous. We're very cautious about that. But what it does do is it helps us right size and right plan a building. Doing that front end utilization studies with some of those sensors can be very helpful. It does inform then that next generation of building. I will tell you, spoiler alert if you haven't heard it, what we're seeing is educational environments are trending to be less static classroom and much more fluid. The students of today and tomorrow want to have an asynchronous learning environment in which they can choose what they need to do for that day, who they're going to do it with, and what environment best supports that work and that learning mode. The most successful higher education institutions are going to be first to be adaptable and fluid with their teaching methodologies and allow students to really have some autonomy in their learning structure across the course of their 4 or 6 years at that institution. We're seeing that come online. The other thing is just understanding that virtual digital interface from a recruitment standpoint. That's where it starts. A student has toured your facility and understood your program before they step foot on campus. Being very, very understanding that the things that are important to them, they've already looked that up before they've walked in the door.
They're smarter than we think they are. You made a very valid point that has been echoed in almost every episode leading up to this one about the need for flexibility in particularly the academic spaces for the change of pedagogy, for the inclusion of high flex or hybrid flexible learning environments, and how students choose to consume that learning experience, whether it be online or in person, and giving them that option has become critically important to enrollment, especially due to what's known as the demographic cliff, where we're seeing a declining enrollment just because there have been fewer children born in the last 20 years. So we're going to see a decline between now and 2030. What should universities prioritize if they want to create healthy, sustainable, and integrated learning environments on a limited budget?
I knew you were going to ask about budget. Although I say, sometimes it doesn't cost anymore when you look at the 30, 40-year picture. When you have a fixed budget and you want to make a market difference, you have to understand and go back to what are your goals. I don't have a one size fits all answer for this because it depends if what your goal is, what your student focus is. But ultimately, I think relationships is key. That's where the well building standard really comes into play. I recently had a college dean mention to me he can learn more about a student over a cup of coffee or a quick game of ping pong than he'll ever learn sitting across a desk in his office. The physical campus is important. That's what we're talking about today, is the intersection of that. And a sense of connection and human belonging is huge to that. In order to get students on campus, you're going to have to relate to them and you're going to have to create a space that people want to go to because they have a lot of other options in the market. And so creating and using the well building strategies to overlay with a space that has meaning is going to be huge because that's where you're getting that human connection, is sense of place, a reflection of culture, feeling welcome and included, access to daylight, safety and security, which we didn't talk about much, but both well and lead have that in there. That is in the back of one's mind, but that's a huge area where we intersect technology. How do we handle lockdowns? How do we handle data interruption? Both of these standards really help with that, and the automation of buildings in a catastrophic event and how they keep people safe. So I think you start with the easy things, the low cost things. You create a space for human connection. That doesn't cost much. That's furniture and paint. That's the thing to think about, is how do you create that human connection, easy, low cost remodel. Then you can identify other parameters. The most expensive ones are going to be the big ones, like mechanical system overhauls or a new site if it's isolated and hard to get to. There's a lot of little things that you can do. Another little one would be access to nutrition. It doesn't cost a lot to have some fruit and vegetables available. Clean water is a requirement, and really understanding what are our human basic needs, and then what are that next higher level needs. I mean, go back to Maslow's hierarchy from our early psych classes to understand that connection and belonging is key to recruitment, retention, high performing people, and that's what the Well Building Standard is built around.
Excellent, thank you. What new well and lead criteria or even new certification frameworks are emerging that might change how we design academic buildings?
This is really interesting to me because academic buildings are a piece of a broader community. One of the newer ones that I did speak with the Nebraska Planning Group a year or two ago is understanding from a master planning standpoint. How do we plan well, literally well, campuses to then support well buildings? It's very, very important to do that big picture planning so that we can do individual planning. And so I think what we're going to see is people stepping back from, oh, we got to remodel this or we need this new building, to go, what's the big picture? What's our overall utilization? What's the overall campus vision? Reimagining that in light of the short-term needs. I think we're going to see that a lot, and the Well Building Standard, as a reaction to that, has adapted a new community standard, a well community standard that helps with that planning exercise.
Excellent. What is one underutilized technology or strategy that institutions can implement now to dramatically improve outcomes?
When I think about this question, I hate to say utilization again, but making several spaces do many things well is helpful. We're seeing costs continue to increase across the country, and there is a such thing as a budget, especially in public institutions. So one of the things that they can implement now would be to do a utilization study, to use whatever their scheduling software is. Maybe they don't have very good scheduling software. Update that and start to track how much square footage you have on campus, what those spaces are doing for you, and identify opportunities for improvement. Again, from a lead standpoint, one of the most conservative ways to go about providing support for your learning environments is to better use what you have. So doing a utilization study based on your scheduling software can assist with that. As architects, we do studies like that as well and are happy to help. But I think that's a great first step to understanding, because it could be as simple as a minor remodel. It could be putting different furniture in a room to make it more adaptable and flexible. Those are low cost, low hanging fruit. What can you do over a weekend with a real small budget and make a huge impact? Those are the kinds of things. Then if you have success with it, then you have really good foundation and justification for a larger project that could be more impactful.
Really good, thank you. And that was the whole issue of more data is better. The more data we know, the more we can make applications and draw insights. Is going to be featured in a future episode with Elliot Felix with Burrow Happold, who's a campus strategy planner. He's just written The Connected College, a book that we'll be talking about in a future episode. Finally, we always close with this question. It's a little bit of science fiction. What comes after what comes next? And how does that apply to wellness, sustainability, and campus technology?
What we're experimenting with right now in all aspects of our profession is artificial intelligence. It's been about 20 years. IBM had a study that was The Classroom Will Learn You, and it was based on software for elementary classrooms where they could understand learning styles and behaviors and then adapt curriculum to the individual needs and preferences. I think what we're going to start to see is, not only from a pedagogy standpoint, but also a building support standpoint, we're going to be able to start to study people and buildings and learning environments and social informal learning environments through the use of AI, then adapts our space programs, adapts the type of tech that we put in a facility. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how that all comes together. I do think choice and control is going to be huge, especially with the next generation. We talked about asynchronous learning. It's not going to be a one size fits all. That's what IBM was trying to do all of those years ago, is it's not a one size fits all. But this generation is demanding that at this point in time. I think the higher ed market is going to need to change their buildings in order to create environment and classroom buildings and residential buildings and study facilities that meet the needs of the student at the moment based on their personal preferences. And the fluidity across building design is going to become key. And how that is adapted, how that is controlled, how you schedule. Obviously that was a brilliant idea 20 years ago, but we're going to see that where maybe someone can come in and at a push of a button, the entire space is going to look and feel different because someone feels like they want a certain type of environment that day.
I agree. I think there's going to be a big growth in conversational control. What we see now with the tools like Alexa in our homes, we can apply to larger space applications. It'll be interesting to see how that works itself out. So thank you, Heather. That was a really insightful conversation. Where can listeners learn more about you and your work at Clark Enersen and the projects you're leading?
Well, definitely take a look at clarkenersen.com for any of our current projects. I am a WELL faculty member, and so I speak about 4 times a year and try to post those on our Instagram. So if you follow Clark Enersen, you can get notification of those speaking engagements. They usually are focused on how we plan from a people and human-centric approach, which is what I've built my career on, is buildings are for people. So let's plan them around our needs and our ever-changing needs, which is where today's conversation really came into play. It's exciting, it's fun, and it really brings the why. Why are we doing this? Who are we doing this for? There's just a deep level of meaning involved in this. I love it. So just follow us on Instagram, and you should be able to see any of those upcoming speaking engagements.
Do you have any closing thoughts for campus planners and designers working to align sustainability, technology, and wellness goals?
I would just say, talk to professionals in your area, read up on the Lead and Well websites. They have great webinars, they have great collateral material. Get educated on this. Don't be intimidated by the idea that this is going to cost more, because you can take a whole lot of what's there and apply it yourself simply by getting that knowledge. Definitely check out the resources. The internet has great resources as long as you're on like the Well or the Lead platforms.
Thank you, Heather Keele, and we will talk again soon. And for our audience, thank you for listening. Please follow us on your favorite podcast channel and share our conversations with your friends and colleagues. As always, thanks to the EdUp Experience Network for their support. You can learn more at edupexperience.com. Until next time, let's keep building smart spaces together.